Alrighty, so let's do our discussion, our group activity, our group coding. Remember, again, the idea here is for you to code along with me and then attempt the challenge, and then don't look at other people's code until you've attempted it. Okay, so first I'll go over the code along, and then depending on how much time that takes, I'll either do a separate video for the challenge or what you need to do to share. So kind of what I've been doing before is take the ending code from what we did with the code along and copy it into the public repo in a new W5 folder. So I did this already. So I took that ending code from my private repo. I placed it in a new W5 in my public, and now I'm going to open, because I like to just have those folders open that I am working on. Just makes it a little easier for me. The other thing I would say to do here is actually in the heading put public, so we know that that is public. And now before I start, I'm going to do a little cleanup, okay, and then I'll talk about what we're going to do on this one. So the first thing I'm going to do is come down here at the bottom, and a lot of this stuff you can keep in here if you want, right? I am going to just clean it up, because you do have it, and that's the other thing, is you do have it over in your private repo, so we don't need that. And I'm going to end up using some of this code in a minute, and then I'll get rid of it. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to have you just try to start understanding is the idea of an array of objects. Okay, so we've seen an array. I'm going to call it, now by the way, we already have this variable, right? And notice we have it up there, but because I have it commented out, I can use it here, and I'm only using it here to show the idea of, an object. So, an array. Let me slow down. So in my array, we have learned, and I know we just finished objects, but we can have multiple items, right? So 1, 2, at the end these could be strings, these could be whatever. So that's just a straight an array. But each of these entries inside the array can actually be, in this case, an object. So we could do, right? So each of them. So this would be, now this structure would be an array of objects. And then we've already learned how to loop over, right? We learned how to do two types of, at this point, there's many more ways to loop. Okay, but what we're going to do now is we're going to implement this array of objects in our code. But first I just want you to see, right? So what they look like, and they often can look like this as far as their structure goes when somebody's writing them. But really, right, if we were just looking at them, then we could say, well, actually, we're just going to do one. So let's actually do one. I just want you to see the idea here of what an array of objects is. So how do we do this? We're going to scroll up to the top. Now we're going to uncomment out the array, because now, before, in the last code along, what I had you do, right, was create that object. And then I just had you display out, write some code that displayed that object's content, right? So now what we want to do is we want to have all those objects in this one array. Because again, this is a very common, very, very common structure, data structure we see inside of JavaScript. So how would we change this code? Well, remember what we had here, right? Where we pushed that array, all those values in. Well, we could do a similar thing here. So where we would push something into the array, what we would push could be this object. So there's two basic ways we could do it. I'll show you both, okay? You can kind of think which one you feel is a little more straightforward. So I'm going to still do a push. I'm going to come up after I've created the after I've already created the object that houses, that stores all this data structure, right, of all the things related to our carbon footprint. Now I still do need to open and close the parentheses here, but what I would be pushing, and now I'm going to change this from a multi-dimensional array to just a single dimensional array, and I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, so what I could do is I could just push this object right here. Okay. Just look at that for a minute. I'm going to comment out this line, because now every time I run it, right? Remember, you have different times you've run it. I have 3 times, I'm 4 times. Okay, so every time I run it now, it creates the object, but instead of calling just this one function, now I'm going to push that object into the array, so I have an array of objects. Now the other way I could kind of do this instead of just referencing it, just to kind of clean up my code a little bit, so I could just take the structure itself, copy it, and then just paste in the structure. And then I would no longer need that. So when you're looking at this, you kind of want to just break it down into its parts. Here's the global array. .push is a method. We learned about methods when we got introduced to objects, just barely though. And what are we pushing in the object? Or what are we pushing in the array? We're pushing an object that we've configured, we've set up the values for. Okay? Okay, so let's actually go look now at this. Now there's a couple ways we can look at it, and I'm going to get rid of some of this other for now, because I don't no longer need that, just to make it clear. I no longer need this. Okay. Now in this case I'm not calling, I could call it, but because I don't have that, this line will no longer work. Okay. So what I'd want to do for now, just to see it before I show you, is down here. Now that I've called, right, I've called it 4 times, console.log, and let's just output that array that we know now is an array of objects. Oh, I have to actually start my server. And this is 5. Cool. Nothing here yet. No output yet. Go to the console. And in the console, even though I already have it, I'm going to look now, now I have each entry in the array is an object. So if I wanted to reference, right, the data, data, right? If I wanted to reference that first item in there, I could do it like that. And then if I wanted to look at, let's see, CFP total, right? That's what the reference would look like if I was just looking at individual entries, individual objects in the array. But at this point, I have more knowledge than I have enough knowledge to where I don't necessarily need to do this, because I'd have to write a lot of code if I wanted to output each of these. What I now know how to do is I now know how to write for loops. Okay? So the question would be, and this would be the loop right here. I'm going to uncomment this out because this is a good place for us to start. And I'm going to give you some starting hints here. Okay. Again, I used the one that was the for array of CFP data. Right. So now each of them, and this is where I would change this, and you'll see why in a minute. I'm going to output, and the console, just the array. But I'm doing this to show you why I would change this. Because now, as I iterate over, as I loop over the data, each of them is no longer an array. Each of them is now an object. And I'll show you this because this is important to understand. Actually, I do have to call that. So let me go ahead, and after I do this, I'm going to say display output. And all I have to do, because that is, in this case, right, this is on the global. There's a couple ways I could do this, but I'm just going to leave it there for now. And what I'm talking about is I could pass it in here. But because this is out on the global space, I don't absolutely have to. That's probably something I'll show you later. More than anything, I was just showing you when you iterate over that, how it changes the output. So let's go look at it. So now, and this is important before you do the next step, right? Cool. So now this output that is iterating over it, each of them is no longer an array, even though my for loop is still saying array. That's because I just made that up. So really what I would do here is I'd call this object. And then here I would call this object. Now actually when we're doing the, when we're iterating over, and we're still iterating over an array, right? There's other loops we could look at to pull out all the data, but we don't actually have to. I mean, for now, this doesn't change anything. What it does is now it makes it at least a little more clear, right? Now, how would we modify this code to take advantage of this new object, right? And again, the objects we created, we push them here. So what is in there are these key value pairs. So again, I'm going to show you one, and then your challenge will be to do the rest. Let me do this one too. Okay. So total carbon footprint, we've already modified this before. So now, how would we reference it inside this for loop? We'd first call object dot, and now we'd have to know its key. Okay, and I happen to remember its key is total. So if I come back over here, let's see if I'm getting my CFP total. Oh, what did I forget? Is I can't forget I have to append it. We're going to learn better ways and more ways to build up DOM elements here pretty soon. But for now, that's all I'd have to do to get that output. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. In okay, so the challenge for you first, right, commit this that you've coded along with me, and now finish the rest of it out. And in your post, right, once you get the rest of the output modified to use that array of objects, iterating over the array, right? Then I want you to talk about and play with, actually what I would suggest you do is play with this array of objects. And then talk about questions you have, right? So at this point, this is a perfect place. It was, to ask questions about this new data structure, because we're combining two things we've learned in the past to, again, the most common data structure we see inside of JavaScript, which, by the way, you can also do it the other way around. You could have objects that have arrays in them too. So that's why this structure A is very, very common and very flexible. So we're just learning it in the arrays, an array of objects. Okay? Okay, so I'll write this up to be more specific about what I want you to play with here. And then I might think of something else I want you to do, because this should be, I've given you at least the ground to then modify this to figure out how to change this. So I might give you, I'll give it a few minutes to think about it and see what else I'd want to change. Okay. commit this code, set up an array of objects. Set up an array of objects, yeah.